Well, Agnes Kalamard is one of the few people to have heard the tape of Mr. Khashoggi's last moments. United Nations Special Rapporteur leading the investigation into his killing concluded that the state of Saudi Arabia was responsible for a premeditated extrajudicial execution. She has been critical of the Saudi Crown Prince's comments yesterday, and she joins me now live from Istanbul. You heard the Crown Prince say that he takes full responsibility. It was on his watch. Your response?
Well, two reactions to it. The first one is that implicitly he recognizes that this was a state killing, that this was a murder for which the state is responsible to the extent that he is a state, that he is a quasi-head of state. This is something I have been asking for on the basis of my findings for the last 3 months. Something that the authorities have rejected. So I am glad somehow that there is now a formal recognition that this is a state killing for which the state of Saudi Arabia is responsible. Secondly, though, the Crown Prince takes great pain distancing himself, creating barriers and layers of people and institutions between the killing and himself. And that distancing, for me, is not backed by the evidence that I have provided in my report. The relationship between those that perpetrated the killing and the Crown Prince are close enough, far closer, in fact, than he is prepared to recognize it. And in his statement, he still fails to recognize his personal responsibilities. All he is doing is what corporate actors, head of state, typically do to move away from the focus. He is claiming some high-level responsibilities, but refuses to acknowledge his personal liability for the killing.
Let's just take a look at what your report states, because you say there is credible evidence warranting further investigation of high-level Saudi officials, including liability, individual liability, including the Crown Prince's. Yesterday, he told CBS, and I quote him here, there isn't clear information or evidence that someone close to me did something to that effect. There are charges and they're being investigated. Those were his words in response to a very specific question. How do you respond to that?
Look, let's look at the evidence, okay? 15 individuals, all members of state intelligence or security agencies. A murder that was planned at least 3 days before it was executed. It involved heavy state resources. It involved diplomatic clearance for the plane that brought 8 of those individuals to Istanbul. 2 of those traveled on a diplomatic passport. The killing took place in the consulate. There is evidence from the Saudi prosecutor himself that one of the closest advisors to the Crown Prince was implicated. And here I mean Saud al-Qahtani, who the prosecutor has linked directly to the incitement to the killing, to the at least the disappearance of Mr. Khashoggi. All of those items, all of those elements point to a state action, to premeditation, to planning, to well-organized. And let me add something. An action with that degree of preparation, that degree of confidence, could not have taken place without the highest level of the state being implicated in its execution.
Agnes, Khashoggi's son, Salah Khashoggi, has released a statement on Twitter, and I quote this to you. 1 year has passed since the passing of my dear father, during which the country's foes and its enemies in the East and West sought to exploit his case. May God have mercy on him to come after my country in leadership. I repeat what I said before. I have complete trust in the kingdom's judicial system in achieving complete justice against those who have committed this heinous crime. Saudi state media also tweeting parts of that statement. It's unknown under what circumstances he wrote that tweet. He is still in Saudi Arabia. And this is a picture of Salah with the Crown Prince soon after his father's murder. I think the point is that he uses the same language as the Crown Prince, saying, quote, heinous crime. And he asks in this tweet that the investigation be allowed to run its course, to which you say what?
But the investigation is finished. They are at the level of prosecution at the moment. They are in trial. They've indicted 11 people. So I'm all for a continuing investigation. There is no evidence that the investigation is ongoing. There is no evidence that the chain of command is being investigated. In fact, the one person that has been mentioned by the prosecutor himself, Saud al-Qahtani, is still not in the trial. The first response. The second response, and my heart goes to the son of Mr. Khashoggi. And I believe that justice must be delivered to the victims, and that includes him and the rest of the family. But the execution of Mr. Khashoggi is bigger than what he may want for. His fiancée, Mr. Khashoggi's fiancée, is also a victim, and she has a very different position than the son. Two, Mr. Khashoggi was a journalist. He worked for the Washington Post. He was an American resident. Over the years, he had built a huge community of people who respected him, who loved him, who wants now justice for him. So while, of course, justice according to what the son wants is important, this is not the only justice that must be delivered. Okay. There is far bigger objectives right now.
Very briefly then, what is your view on how the international community has responded over the past year? And what are you calling for next?
Okay, so overall the international community has been weak in its response. Some of them have delivered good statements. They have not been followed up by actions. There is one exception. I believe that at the moment, the US Congress is demonstrating great leadership and commitment to ensure that the crime does not get unpunished. So that's the first thing. What am I asking? I am asking for continuing truth-telling over the chain of command. That information is in Saudi Arabia, but it is also in the United States. The CIA briefing must be declassified. The FBI must be undertaking an investigation. The Congress that has demanded for a public report on who ordered the crime, that should be realized as well. Truth-telling is part of justice for Mr. Khashoggi. G20 in Riyadh, that too is not justice for Mr. Khashoggi. It's the antithesis of justice for Mr. Khashoggi. The international community must take a strong commitment and act act in accordance with some of the big words that it has delivered around the need for accountability.